Hi everybody and welcome to the Weekly Accounting Show from the UTS Accounting Discipline Group. My name is Amanda White.
Nelson Ma.
And we hope you've had a good week. We are into, is it week 4 this week?
Week 4.
Week 4. So Nelson, what sort of things are in the news this week?
So a big discussion point right now is around JobKeeper and what's going to happen once JobKeeper ends. And I think before that, well, who received JobKeeper but probably shouldn't have been. So,
and for any students who are like, what is JobKeeper? JobKeeper was a government scheme which is running until, is it the end of March?
End of March, yeah.
And so what happened was employers received funds to keep people on the books. So this technically didn't force people into unemployment, which is why our unemployment rate hasn't gone up. But they received payments that then they had to pass on to their employees.
Yes.
And under what eligibility rules do firms have to have?
Well, basically they had to demonstrate that there was going to be a significant drop in profit. And so that drop was going to force them, presumably, to cut staff. So the government wanted to avoid that by giving them these subsidized payments to pay their staff.
And was it profit or was it revenue? Revenue.
One of the, a combination of things.
Yes, but it had to be a 30% decline in revenue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so at this stage, a lot of companies did a lot better than they expected during the pandemic year. And a lot of these companies are now receiving a lot of pressure to make these repayments. And so you take, for instance, Harvey Norman, right? Retailer, I'm sure you guys would have purchased stuff from. They received $22 million in JobKeeper bonuses, payments. They made $460 million in profits and paid out $250 million in dividends. So it stands to question why and they've chosen to keep the payments. And it stands to question why they've decided not to repay, even though they've made huge profits, like massive growth on prior years.
I guess because everybody's staying at home, everyone's buying a coffee machine, a new TV, printer.
Yeah, but then it kind of violates the condition of receiving JobKeeper, right? That there would be a significant drop in revenues and presumably profits. And then you take a more egregious example, which is Accent Group. So if you shopped at Platypus or Hype DC, that's Accent. They received about $50 million in JobKeeper bonuses, and they're paying, and their profits were up 50%. Their profits are about $50 million, and they're paying out dividends over $25 million. And it goes to show, they're paying out and their dividends are growing at 50% of prior years. And so it kind of stands to question why they kept the JobKeeper payments when they clearly didn't need it, and they're choosing not to repay it. And so from an accounting perspective, when you think about how we treat accounting information in the capital markets, well, when a company increases their dividends, you assume that their profits are going to have increased substantially, and that's going to hold over many years. But if they're paying out profits because of JobKeeper, you kind of see this bias in dividends being higher than they should be, because they're not based on sustainable sources of money.
And theoretically, companies are not supposed to keep any of the JobKeeper money that they get. So the government pays them JobKeeper, they are supposed to directly pay it to their employees. And these companies are making more, selling more because of what's been happening online. Now, some companies have paid it back. So I think Toyota and a few others have bowed to union pressure, employee pressure to hand it back. But I can tell you that, and I'll put a link to the article in the description of the video, is that the federal government has actually referred one publicly listed company to a police criminal task force over what they're doing with their JobKeeper payments. So there's certainly a lot of area and a lot of risk for rorting of the system for big publicly listed companies, as well as smaller organizations that might have tried to backdate putting employees on the books, over exaggerating how many hours people worked before. I think there's been some investigation and some claims have been turned back for JobKeeper by the ATO before they've even been in that processing stage, where an employee can't claim JobKeeper from 2 different places, or somebody who was not alive
Yeah.
JobKeeper. So, business is trying to claim JobKeeper. So this is certainly quite a tangled web. If you're looking in the financial statements of a company that has received JobKeeper, what sort of things are you going to be looking for in that analysis?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that it's not entirely apparent who's received JobKeeper, because the government doesn't keep a list.
Well, they keep a list, they probably just don't.
Yeah,
publish
they
a list.
don't keep a list that's publicly available. And so as a result, it's not entirely clear who's received and who hasn't, although it would show up as additional payments.
It'd have to be in the cash flow statement.
It'd be in the
right?
cash flow statement, definitely. Yeah, but it's not entirely clear how it's recognized as a government grant or specifically said as JobKeeper. But the point is, like, it's not entirely
and
obvious.
cash flow statements are quite aggregated.
Yes.
As well, so it
Yeah.
could be hidden in one of
Yeah.
these line items and we don't even know.
Absolutely.
Interesting reporting season ahead for a lot of those companies that once we hit 30 June for the reporting year end for most of those companies. Do you know if any of those companies have March year ends? Not many that I think
It's very
of. It's
small
mostly
number.
banks,
Yeah.
financial institutions that are sort of on the March year end, so we'll be watching, September, really carefully. But I guess this also means that if we are talking about this in the market, what do you think accountants are doing inside these companies?
Well, I guess they may be bowing to pressure from management to try to keep these numbers a bit less obvious to avoid the public scrutiny.
So this is where auditors need to be careful and where accountants need to think, okay, if this is not the right thing to do, then I need to say something, I need to speak out, go to your audit committee or to talk to somebody independent directors and say, look, I'm being pressured to report something in a particular way. Because sometimes as an accountant in an organisation, you can feel a lot of pressure to make profit a certain number, or we've got to beat our analyst forecasts so that the market thinks we're doing well. So there's certainly a lot of pressure there and lots of interesting stuff for accounting students. Now, what else is going on this week?
So in week 4, I think you mentioned this to me earlier on, but students are still asking, do we need a textbook?
Do you need to buy the textbook? So there are reasons why we prescribe textbooks, and it's not just because we want you to buy one. Do you make any money from prescribing a specific textbook?
Absolutely not.
And even if none of us are authors on textbooks, but so Nelson doesn't get a kickback from saying this is a particular textbook that you need. But from an educational perspective, the textbook is your anchor, right? So it is the base point at which you start. And so if you're not understanding the lectures, you're not understanding the recordings or the homework, then the textbook is your anchor. And it's really important that no matter what you're studying, whether it's accounting or science or learning something else, there has to be some sort of anchor.
Yep.
And in most instances, that anchor is the textbook. Now, for my subject, where I teach auditing, those auditing standards, which we can download off the internet, are that anchor. So in your subject, if there's not a textbook, what would you normally find if they don't prescribe a text?
Well, there's usually some online source that you're able to obtain all that information from, or there's supplementary resources.
Or reading lists.
Yeah. All those kinds of things.
Yeah. Now, for UTS students, you find your reading list on Canvas. Down the side menu where there's like assignments, modules, etc. There is a reading list. If your subject has a reading list, that's where it'll be. Because I know that there are some subjects that have a textbook, but they also have other readings that you should look at. Nelson, if there's something in the textbook that perhaps is not in the homework questions, or the lecturer only spent one slide on it, but there's 5 pages in the book, should you still learn that part of the book?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, so all subject coordinators in their subject outlines will state what chapters need to be read, and in some cases specifically what pages. So if they mention a chapter, then all parts of that should be read, even if it features to a lesser extent in the slides.
Because sometimes what we do is, for a standard, I will take the most complicated part to talk about in the lecture or the recorded materials. And then I will take, again, the most complicated part of all of those other bits is the bit that we're going to focus our workshop or our tutorial on. So just because something isn't covered in a tutorial, or a lecture, but is in your textbook, you probably should still look at it.
Yeah.
Because there could be a question on that in an exam or some other form of assessment. So I know they're expensive. Secondhand is one place to look. So you could look at Student VIP, there's Facebook textbook groups, and also the UTS library has limited numbers of copies of physical books as well as electronic books.
Cool.
If you're looking at an electronic text and you log on during the day and that version, with say 6 copies of it is checked out, try and look at an unusual time. So quite often someone has to be reading the book to check it out. So, you might try it something like early in the morning or late in the evening when less students are likely to be studying, usually early in the morning, less so late in the evening, to go onto the library website and try looking for the online book that way. Cool.
Excellent.
Anything that students should be starting to think about now that we're in week 4?
Well,
Assignments are starting, right?
assignments definitely. So if you haven't started doing your assignments already, then pretty sure for most of you guys, as an assignment is coming up, so pay close attention.
Start to map out a plan. Yeah?
Yes.
Is there any research? Where can they get help if they need research assistance for an assignment?
Well, you go to class and start by asking questions to your lecturer, tutors.
And then the other place to go would be the UTS library.
Yes.
So they have an assignment help service, and you can go in person, and there's also like a chat bot online. So if you've ever been to the library website and there's like a little bubble pops up to chat, it's a real librarian on the other end.
Oh, really?
It's not an automated bot. We have built an automated bot before to help students, which was about 50-50.
It's about 50-50.
It's about 50-50. But the library one has a real person on the other end of the line. So you can always get help remotely if you can't come into campus.
That's great to know.
Awesome. All right, well, that's it for us this week, folks. Of course, if you have any questions, burning questions that you want us to answer, things about uni, things for specific subjects, you should ask your subject coordinators. But otherwise, we'll see you next week.